sure you've heard about this case. If not, buckle up, you're in for an adventure. But yeah, and I love hiking and the things and the adventure that this case involves, and so it's just really disturbing how something that is intended to be fun and lighthearted and adventurous can turn dark so quickly, and nobody has an answer as to why it went this way. So we will dive right in. I am not upset, but I just was doing laundry for work in the morning, and I decided to throw in all of my new Christmas gift clothes with my scrubs and my work uniform. And turns out I had an ink pen in my scrub pocket that bust in the dryer, and now all of my brand new clothes are stained. So that is great. If anyone has tips as to how to get that out, please let me know. And I also don't know what my hair is doing today, but it's okay. We'll get into the case. Excuse me if I pronounce anything weird. Please correct me as well. You all know that I prefer to be corrected because as much as I am educating you all, if you haven't heard about this case, I like to be educated myself. So if I pronounce anything wrong or get any of the facts wrong, please let me know in the comments. Okay, let's jump right in. So, the Dyatlov Pass incident occurred in 1959, so this is a fairly older case. In late January of 1959, the wind endlessly swept across the white slopes of the Ural Mountains, carving sharp ridges into the snow and howling through the trees. It was into this frozen wilderness that 9 young hikers skied north, unaware that their journey would become one of the Soviet Union's darkest and most enduring stories. The group departed from Sverdlovsk on January 23rd, 1959. They were students and recent graduates of the Ural Polytechnical Institute, all very experienced in winter trekking. Their leader, Igor Dyatlov, was 23 years old, calm, intelligent, and respected. The goal was ambitious, a ski trek to Mount Otterton, a route so difficult it qualified the group for Grade 3 certification, the highest level at this time. There were 9 hikers, as I mentioned, all early to mid-20s, and one member, Yuri Yudin, turned back early due to an illness, and he would be the only survivor. The group kept a journal and a camera. Their photos show smiling faces, jokes, and confidence, no ounce of fear. By January 31st, they reached the edge of the forest near a mountain known to the local Mansi people as Kholat Syakhl, or in English, Dead Mountain. On February 1st, instead of descending to shelter, they pitched their tent high on the exposed slope. It would be their last deliberate decision. Sometime during the night of February 1st or 2nd, something terrifying happened. Investigators would later discover that the hikers had cut their way out of their tent from the inside, slicing through the heavy fabric rather than using the entrance. Their boots, coats, and supplies were left behind, and temperatures reaching -30 degrees Celsius or -22 degrees Fahrenheit, the group fled into the darkness. Some were barefoot, some were in socks, and others were only partially dressed. Footprints preserved in the snow showed no sign of panic or struggle, just 9 sets of prints casually leading downhill toward the forest. Why they left remains the central mystery. When the hikers failed to return, a search began in late February. On February 26th, rescuers found the tent. It was collapsed, partially buried, and eerily silent. About a mile away, at the edge of the forest, they found the remains of a small campfire beneath a cedar tree. Nearby this campfire lay the bodies of Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonichenko. Barefoot and wearing only underwear. Their hands were burned, likely from trying to keep warm or climb the tree. Between the forest and the tent, searchers found 3 more bodies: Igor Dyatlov, Zinaida Komogorova, and Rustem Slobodin. They appeared to be attempting to return to the tent. All 5 were determined to have died from hypothermia, though Slobodin had a skull fracture, which wasn't fatal, but it was unexplained. It was not until May, when the snow began to melt, that the final 4 bodies were discovered in a ravine deep in the forest. What searchers found shocked even hardened investigators. Lyudmila Dubinina had massive chest injuries, multiple broken ribs, but no external wounds. Semyon Zolochirov suffered similar chest trauma. Nikolai Brignol had a crushed skull. Dubinina was missing her tongue, her eyes, and part of her face. So let me just briefly go over that again. The 4 other bodies were found in a ravine deep inside this forest. 1 girl had massive chest injuries, broken ribs, but no external injuries. Her friend suffered similar chest trauma. Nikolai had a crushed skull, and Dubinina was missing her tongue, her eyes, and a part of her face. Some of their clothes carried unusually high levels of radiation. Several of the hikers were wearing clothes taken from others who had already died. This suggests desperate attempts to survive. How sad is that? They just wanted to go take their graduation trip. They were so proud of themselves. They had worked so hard for this experience. And this happens. And they're wearing the clothes of their deceased friends to try and stay warm in this below negative weather. I cannot imagine. The injuries were described by a forensic expert as comparable to the force of a car crash, yet there were no signs of struggle or attack. Like, that's just baffling. That makes no sense. In May of 1959, the investigation ended abruptly. Keyword abruptly. So, February, the end of February is really March, April, and May. Only 3 months. They just stopped investigating. conclusions stated that the hikers died due to a, quote, compelling natural force, end quote. The case was sealed and files disappeared. Families received little to no answers, and the questions only grew louder. And that is the end of the case, but we are going to dive into the most popular theories. It just really bothers me that the case was abruptly closed and files disappeared. So the things like the photos we don't have access to, or journals, or really much more forensic evidence either, we just don't know. The first theory is the avalanche theory. Modern investigators favor a small slab avalanche. According to this theory, the snow buildup above the tent collapsed. The hikers fled in fear of a larger avalanche. Some were injured by the snow pressure, and disorientation and hypothermia did the rest. But critics argue that the slope angle was relatively shallow. The tent was still standing and remained standing, and no classic avalanche debris was found. So I mean, that kind of seems like it negates that telling, and that's the most popular and researched theory. So, second is katabatic winds, which are powerful downhill winds that may have created intense noise and pressure, caused the tent to partially collapse, and triggered panic and disorientation. But this really only explains the calm footprints but sudden evacuation. The next theory is infrasound panic. Certain wind conditions can produce low-frequency sound waves that can cause anxiety, confusion, and a feeling of impending doom. This theory suggests the hikers fled in irrational terror, but does not explain the injuries. Gosh. The concept of impending doom is so scary to me. Because, like, in the ER, if, like, I give a medication or am transfusing blood or something, and they're like, I feel a sense of impending doom, you're like, something ain't right. Like, that is your telltale sign that, like, stop what you're doing and investigate. Because impending doom is no joke. That is intuition at its finest. That is so scary. The next theory, and at first this was the one that I could kind of see being accurate, is military testing. Some witnesses report seeing orange lights in the sky the night of the incident. Theories include secret Soviet weapons testing, or parachute mines causing blast injuries without burns. The radiation on clothing fuels this idea, though no proof exists. This was the one that I could kind of see, because if it was military related, of course it's going to be shut down and covered up ASAP by the government like it was. It would also explain the injuries and the radiation, of course. But I think it would explain, like, the panic and stuff as well, because that would be really disorienting and confusing. But at the same time, you just don't know, right? Like, gosh. And the last theory is an animal or human attack, but these theories were largely dismissed as there were no defensive wounds found, no signs of a struggle, and no evidence of another group of people. So, the grim reality is, what what is known is simple and horrifying. 9 very capable hikers left safely together, fully prepared. They did not return, and something in those woods made them abandon everything in the freezing dark. Whether it was snow, sound, wind, or something still unknown, the Dyatlov Pass incident endures because the evidence tells conflicting stories, but no single explanation answers every question. On the maps of Russia, the place still bears Dyatlov's name, and the winter wind of the Urals. The mystery remains. So, that is the story, and I did kind of jot down some stuff about going deeper into the forensic evidence. So, one thing we can assume is instead of going into the forest for shelter, they chose to pitch their tent directly on the exposed slope to maintain altitude for the next day's route. The tent was secured with skis and poles partially dug into the snow for insulation. Inside the tent, boots were lined up neatly and clothing was folded. Their stove had not yet been lit, suggesting that this disaster occurred before the group fully settled in for the night. In the tent was the first set of clues. When the searchers found the tent weeks later, these details were precise. Multiple long cuts were found on the side facing downhill. The cuts were made from the inside of the tent. The entrance flap was functional and unobstructed. Personal items like boots, coats, and gloves were left behind, indicating that there was extreme urgency when they were leaving. Cutting through canvas in sub-zero temperatures requires deliberate force and decision-making. This was not just panic, it was a perceived necessity that they go this way to get downhill and out of there as fast as they could. However, no blood was found inside the tent. No signs of struggle was found inside the tent, and there were no footprints other than the hikers. So whatever they were afraid of was outside the tent, yet they believed that the inside of the tent was no longer safe. Below the tent, investigators documented 9 distinct sets of footprints. Some were barefoot, some were in socks, some only wore a single boot, but all moved downhill in a relatively straight line. There were no signs of running or chaotic movement. And so it was panic, but it was also very calculated. They went just straight line. And in forensic psychology, panic usually leaves erratic movement. But here, the hikers appeared controlled but compelled, suggesting fear without hysteria, a belief that staying together improved survival, and cognitive function was still intact at departure. So these details contradict theories involving mass hallucinations or immediate violent attack. So, this evidence, again, I'll say again, negates a mass hallucination event or immediate violent attack. So you just have to wonder why would they do that, you know? It's so odd and scary, I get chills thinking about it. Now, the next detail is the cedar tree. And and hypothermia sets in. At the forest edge, beneath a tall cedar, investigators found the first two bodies near this campfire that we mentioned. Both of these bodies were barefoot. They were only wearing underwear. Their skin was darkened and mottled. They had burned fingertips and they had scratches on their arms and legs. And the forensic interpretation of this is death by hypothermia. Burns caused by an attempt to warm themselves. Scratching was consistent with climbing the cedar tree, which was likely done to break branches for firewood or gain visibility of the tent. These bodies had no internal trauma and no defensive wounds, and these two men likely died first. After this is where the paradoxical undressing begins. Hypothermia can cause a phenomenon called paradoxical undressing, where victims feel intensely hot due to failure of temperature regulation in the hypothalamus. This explains why the first victims were nearly naked, and why others later removed clothing from their bodies to survive. This detail strongly supports hypothermia as a terminal process, even if it was not the initiating cause. The return attempt was the bodies found on the slope. So between the cedar and the tent lay three bodies, positioned as if frozen mid-effort. So it's believed that these three were attempting to go back to the tent from the campfire. Igor Dyatlov was found face down with minor abrasions and no fractures. Zinaida Kolmogorova had bruising on her torso, scratches on her hands, but no lethal injuries. Rustem Slobodin had a linear skull fracture, but no brain hemorrhage, and his injury was not immediately fatal, therefore it was not determined to be the cause of death. The forensic interpretation of these findings suggests that these three were attempting to return to the tent after realizing the exposure was unsurvivable. Slobodin's head injury likely resulted from a fall on ice or compacted snow, not an assault. The cause of death for all three was hypothermia. Now, the bodies found in the ravine, these were the ones that were catastrophically injured with trauma wounds on the inside. And these people were not found until months later, in May, right before this whole thing was put on hush. 4 bodies were discovered 75 meters into the forest, buried beneath nearly 4 meters of snow in a ravine with a frozen stream. 75 meters into the forest, under 4 meters of snow. They had built a snow den, suggesting lucid problem-solving persisted. So they were trying to build shelter from the snow, with snow essentially is what this is saying, so they were kind of distorted in their decision-making at this point. The autopsy findings of Dubinina were her missing tongue, missing eyes, missing part of facial tissue, 10 broken ribs, internal hemorrhaging, and no external chest wounds. So the interpretation of this is the rib fractures were caused by massive compressive force. Soft tissue loss was consistent with post-mortem decomposition mass was likely due to natural scavengers, tissue maceration, or gravity and water movement. But she was alive when her chest was crushed. I cannot imagine. That's just so not fathomable. Semyon Zolotarov, his autopsy findings concluded 5 broken ribs, massive internal bleeding, no external trauma, his eyes were missing, and he had a camera around his neck that was undamaged. Injury pattern suggests high-pressure blunt force, not impact against a sharp object. He remained conscious long enough to change clothes. Nikolai's autopsy findings were a crushed skull, severe brain damage, but no external lacerations. This interpretation was the injury that was comparable to vehicular trauma, likely caused by sudden deceleration or collapse of heavy snow mass. Alexander's autopsy findings showed no major trauma, but he had neck tissue damage, likely caused by hypothermia. And I found this. It says, radiation, the most misunderstood detail. Radiation was detected on some clothing. And the key context was both hikers' clothing that the radiation was found on had previously worked in nuclear facilities. No radiation was detected on skin or in the environment. So, some forensic experts agree that this was incidental contamination, not environmental exposure, which might negate the military theory. So, the mechanism of trauma. What could cause this? The chest injuries lacked external bruising, penetrating wounds, and defensive trauma. So this narrows causes to snow slab collapse, compaction in a ravine, or high force pressure distributed over surface area. So what's strange is the injuries were consistent with avalanche-related trauma, but there was no classic evidence that an avalanche this big occurred. So, it's very scary because the final thought is an avalanche. And, yeah, like, they are trying to say that everything points to like an avalanche, basically, which would explain everything other than the fact that, again, no like classic signs of an avalanche were found. Like, make that make sense. I just found this case very disturbing, and I wanted to share it with you all because you guys know that I love hearing your thoughts and opinions. So please share what you have to think, and I have got to go to bed because I work in 7 hours. So I also realized that I had my septum down during this video. So yeah, I don't think I've ever worn it down in a YouTube video before. I'm not sure if people even know I have it, but I've had it for 4 years. I just